Good evening. My big idea is about the smallest people in our society. And that's because the one thing that we all have in common as human beings, no matter whether we're rich or poor, black or white, young or old, no matter whether we're a Mongolian herdsman or a Manhattan merchant banker, we are all the result of a pregnancy. And at the end of that pregnancy, we all have to make that 7-inch journey, that dangerous yet very short journey down the birth canal. Somewhere in the world, every minute a pregnant woman dies in trying to deliver that baby. And every year, 4 million babies are either stillborn or die in the first few days of life. Now, you might be sitting here tonight in the audience or watching this on the internet and thinking, but surely these days birth is not that dangerous. Well, happily in a country like Ireland with modern antenatal care, pregnancy and birth is usually safe. But nevertheless, 1 in 6 pregnancies here and everywhere in the world results in a baby that's either born too soon or too small, or sometimes both. So tonight, I'd like to tell you about our big idea. We want to develop a small, cheap, robust, highly sensitive, fast and non-invasive test that can be used in every healthcare setting, whether it's a Dublin maternity unit or a desert in Africa, that will detect the small and vulnerable baby that is too sick and is not adequately reserved enough to make that journey. As a doctor who spends my days, and frequently my nights as well, looking after these babies whilst they're in the womb, it's one of my greatest challenges. Most doctors have patients who, if they're feeling unwell, can make an appointment, pick up the phone, call in at the surgery. But a baby who grows in the quiet stillness of the womb for 9 months can't phone me, they can't knock on the door, they have no way of flagging my attention to tell me that they're sick or small or vulnerable. In recent decades, ultrasound has helped greatly in detecting those small and sick babies. Ultrasound uses sound waves, which generates moving images, and we can capture both the size of the baby, structural abnormalities. We can even these days tell whether the placenta, the baby's life support capsule, is working adequately. But ultrasound isn't perfect. It relies on very expensive equipment, and it depends on very highly experienced and therefore very expensive personnel. In the hospital where I work, we deliver 9,000 babies a year. If we were to roll out ultrasound as a screening test to detect late onset small babies in pregnancy, that would mean an additional 9,000 scans a year. And that simply isn't feasible, not even in a country like Ireland, let alone some of the sort of low resource countries where these babies are most prevalent. As a result, here in Ireland and elsewhere, a significant number of babies reach the day they have to start that journey, small and sick, with limited reserves, and at a very high risk of death or disability as a direct result of exiting the womb. Now, my research group has spent the last decade trying to develop tests to screen for babies who are small, too small to make that journey. And we've done this by using a technology that many people will be more familiar with from a different branch of medicine, that of forensic science. Now, everyone's familiar with modern TV detective serials where a small drop of blood at the crime scene and a very talented, usually stunningly attractive forensic scientist will result in the capture of the perpetrator, usually before the first ad break. The equipment that they use is mass spectrometry, and anyone who's seen CSI Miami will be very familiar with mass spectrometry, or mass spec. It's a complicated piece of kit that sits at the junction of physics and chemistry, and these days we're using it to explore biology. Mass spec is brilliant because it can actually break down small compounds into their tiny constituent parts, and as a result of that can identify simultaneously thousands and thousands of metabolites or small chemicals within any given biological substance, like blood. We're using it right now to develop a snapshot or a fingerprint of what the blood looks like in the bloodstream of pregnant women carrying small or sick babies. Like fingerprints, the metabolome is unique, the metabolite signature is unique. But unlike fingerprints, it changes in a very dynamic fashion in health and particularly in response to disease. And that's crucial because it is a very, very diagnostic pattern for the conditions that we're looking at. My team have used metabolomic fingerprinting to look at the signatures of pregnant women who are expecting small babies. Those babies who are smaller than expected because the placenta is not working, and these are the very babies that are at high risk of death or disability during birth. They need special monitoring, and in some cases, they need to actually bypass the birth canal altogether and be delivered by caesarean section. So far, we've identified 14 distinct signaling metabolites or chemicals that can tell with 100% accuracy which babies are too small to make that journey. Well, that's great, all well and good, but so far we seem to have replaced ultrasound, a very expensive piece of machinery, with another really expensive piece of machinery. And that's not really going to help the wife of that Mongolian herdsman, or in fact the 120 babies who've died somewhere in the world since I started talking. So the second part of our big idea was to take these biomarkers and develop a lab on a chip. So what do we mean by that? Well, most people will be very familiar with pregnancy tests. Pregnancy tests modern pregnancy tests are highly sensitive, very specific, they're very robust, and they're very cheap. They cost about €2 to manufacture. They rely on a complex biochemical reaction which picks up the pregnancy hormone, beta-HCG, in the urine, and it gives a colorimetric response, usually a blue line or a pink line. We are using a very similar technology to miniaturize the biomarkers we've detected in the blood on a small chip. Using complex years and years of biochemistry research allied to modern surface chemistry techniques, we're actually going to be able to simultaneously measure our 14 metabolites on a small plastic chip. Accurate knowledge of the presence or absence of these 14 biomarkers will give us the chance to actually detect these babies prior to the onset of labour or birth. And our test will light up with a green line if the baby is fit and able to make that journey down the birth canal, or a red line if the baby is vulnerable and in trouble. That will signal that the baby needs special monitoring or even a delivery by cesarean section. So our big idea, which will transfer to other pregnancy complications and even outside of pregnancy into other acute medical conditions that need point-of-care devices, will actually revolutionise antenatal care. It will give us the forensic clues we need to detect those small vulnerable babies who are at risk of stillbirth in late pregnancy or during delivery. We call this the Baby Safe chip. And like most overnight successes, there's been about 12 years of research behind it, and we're not there yet. But we are in a very exciting place. We hope that we're about 12 months away from being able to trial this. And interestingly, we're going to be able to do so in low-resource countries where these babies are at their most vulnerable. If it's successful, it will save the lives of millions of babies the world over by making that short but very dangerous journey that tiny bit safer. Thank you for your attention.